Bad Bird presents The Second Chance Man, Episode 1.
The morning light fell through the window upon the handsome face of a man seated at a glass desk. The desk was positioned perfectly to catch the sunrise view from the lavish penthouse office, situated in the heart of downtown Seattle. A variety of financial and legal paperwork littered the desk, washing up on the small brass shingle that read, Benjamin Dorn. The man clicked at a computer. The browser was open to a headline from Morgan, West Virginia. The mouth strikes again. Serial killer continues gruesome 10-year killing streak. The man picked up his desk phone, but hesitated when it came to dial. He shifted his large frame and considered his options. Finally, he punched in a number, one known well from memory.
Hello? Lily?
Ben, what's up? Everything looking good for the trip next week?
Lily was referencing a trip they had planned for Costa Rica, a trip that included 3 of their mutual friends. The 5 of them had remained close after attending the same university together, and had an informal tradition of semi-annual group vacations.
Yeah, about that. I just got word that my Aunt Kath just passed away. There's no one left at home except Uncle Shelby, and you know he hasn't been doing well the last couple of years. Unfortunately, I need to go there to help out with some things. That business will keep me from Costa Rica, but you guys should still go though.
Oh my god, that is so sad. She was such a sweetheart. I'm so sorry.
Ben nodded silently.
Yes, yeah, thank you.
But don't think for a second that we are going to let you handle that alone.
Huh?
Ben scratched his ear and winced. He had a feeling that he knew what was coming.
You know that we can't do Costa Rica without you. I'm gonna call the crew. We'll cancel the trip. We'll just book a vacation rental in Morgan and try to make some positive memories despite it all.
Ben anticipated this. The group had always looked to him as the unofficial leader, and he didn't think they would let him off the hook so easily. They often seemed to struggle as a group without him. He may have been the leader, but Lily was the organizer of the group, and she was so stubborn.
How exactly is that gonna go?
Well, I'm gonna find a big, rustic cabin for us all to stay in. We're going to be your moral support while you figure this all out, and I will be supplying you with all the mixed drinks that you need to get the job done.
Ben could practically hear her winking through the phone. He groaned.
Fine, whatever. Uncle Shelby actually does have a place like that. It's nice and pretty close to the lake. I'll let him know we're coming.
Perfect. Sounds like a plan. I'm gonna go call the gang. See you in a couple days.
The phone call concluded. Ben set the phone down with a disappointed sigh. It was mid-morning when the plane touched ground. Lily, Nate, and Taylor were greeted in the small-town terminal by Ben, who had arrived a day earlier. He picked them up and drove them out to the property. On the drive, Ben filled them in on the current situation.
The funeral is this afternoon, and once that's over, I'll have more time to hang out and show you guys around.
Don't worry about us. We'll be fine.
That was Taylor speaking. Taylor was a bubbly yoga instructor from Phoenix who spent her days teaching impossible poses to even more impossible upper-income retirees. She was a patient individual and easy to get along with. Justin echoed the sentiment from the back.
Forget about us, bro, and do what you need to do. We'll be there when you get back. Drunk, maybe, but we'll be there for you.
Justin was a marketing entrepreneur from Northern California and looked the part. Tall, tan, and athletic, with long golden hair that was the envy of his rotating cast of girlfriends.
No, we are all going to the funeral.
Lily said quietly, but with conviction.
Of course we are.
That was Nate. Nate was the quiet member of the group. He was a professional culinary artist, and he, like Ben, lived in Seattle. Ben nodded and looked to the winding road ahead. The funeral was a quiet affair. There were few attendees, and little was said. Due to the intimacy of the proceeding, Ben couldn't help but notice an unfamiliar face. A tall, stern-looking man with gray on his temples. Ben approached him after the casket was laid to rest. He introduced himself and asked the man how he knew Kath. The man didn't speak at first, lighting up a cigarette. When he finally spoke, his voice was deep and gravelly.
To be honest, I didn't. I'm sure she was a fine woman.
He extended his free hand.
My name is James Grover, the investigating detective on Miss Dorn's case.
Ben nodded. He had suspected as much.
Any progress so far?
Grover broke eye contact and looked to the tree line.
None, to be perfectly honest. You've likely heard as much from the news as I could tell you. We think it's the same killer that's been operating in this area for a while now. We have plenty of physical evidence, DNA, prints, hair, all of it. But we're no closer now than we've ever been. I wish I could be more optimistic.
Ben's face contorted with frustration. He followed Grover's gaze out to the tree line, and the two men stood in that way for a few moments. Ben finally broke the silence, speaking hesitantly.
Do you know why he does it that way? The bites, the thing with the hands.
Grover shook his head and put out his cigarette.
There isn't a good answer I can give you.
The two men parted ways shortly after, with Ben and the group heading back to the cabin. The friends quickly unpacked and got settled at the large rental cabin. Nate began to busy himself with preparing dinner, and Lily started drinks. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. Ben got up and answered it.
Uncle Shelby, come in, come in.
The grizzled old man stood for a second on the porch, peering inside the lit cabin, dog leash held loosely in one hand. Then he entered, towing a large golden retriever with him.
I see you folks have gotten comfortable. Good, good. I hope this place treats you well. A lot of memories here. A lot of memories.
The friends all greeted the newcomer, who then took a seat in one of the chairs encircling the fireplace. Suddenly, Lily groaned.
I forgot the tequila, of all things. That's what I forgot. Ben, go to that little store down the way and see if they have some.
Ben got up and grabbed the keys to his rental car.
Sure, no problem. Uncle Shelby, want to come with?
Shelby leaned over and unclipped the dog.
No thanks. I think I'll just stay and chat with these young folks.
Ben hesitated at the door.
Are you sure? It's a bit of a drive. I wouldn't mind some company.
Shelby shook his head with a smile and looked at the floor.
I'll keep you company, big boy.
Justin grinned and grabbed his jacket.
I love a night drive.
Ben feigned a grimace.
Fine.
He walked over to where the old man was seated and whispered briefly in his ear. Shelby, with surprise, looked up. A brief pause elapsed, and then the old man nodded slowly. Ben returned the nod and strode out the door. With Ben and Justin gone, Shelby began to wax about the old days of Morgan, pausing periodically to reprimand the dog. By and by, his ramblings drifted to the subject of the property.
You know, this cabin used to be a lot smaller. Half this size. It had these big maple pillars by the front door. Just beautiful craftsmanship.
He stretched out his arms to demonstrate the size.
My son Joseph actually lived here for a time with his little boy. That boy, he would play all day on this concrete patio out there.
Shelby pointed vaguely.
Just banging around on that thing nonstop. And that cat, that cat.
The old man seemed to be searching for words.
That cat hated Toby more than anything. Kath was so sad when she...
Shelby became increasingly flustered, wiping sweat off his face. Taylor approached him with concern in her eyes.
Is everything okay? Can I get you some water?
Shelby suddenly seemed to snap out of it.
No. Thank you. My mind is just so difficult to recall sometimes. I guess I should probably get going.
Taylor grabbed her keys.
I'll drive you home.
The old man nodded and called for the dog. The store was a small, dated building. The front was covered in wooden placards, advertising various refreshments and live bait. A weathered, drooping stoop dangled perilously over the narrow shop door. Once inside, Ben headed to the back wall to peruse the liquor stock. Justin wandered aimlessly, finally stopping to try on a pair of sunglasses by the register.
Those aren't real Ray-Bans, you know.
An old, weathered woman had emerged from the bathroom, carrying a mop bucket. Justin smirked and put the sunglasses back on the rack.
But they look so real.
The old woman chuckled, and then eyed him more closely.
You boys don't look like locals, am I right?
Justin let out a short laugh.
Good eye. I guess you could consider us, tourists.
The woman nodded knowingly, a thin smile on her lips. But her eyes suddenly narrowed, and she dropped her tone to barely a whisper.
So, are you out here for the lake, the serial killer, or the genie?
Justin shook his head in disbelief.
Is that what brings the ordinary tourist?
Yeah, often as not.
She set the bucket down and began restocking the cigarette shelf.
Well then, what's the deal with the genie? Are we talking 3 wishes kind of deal?
Sort of, or so I've heard. It's a local legend. They call him Old Moreau, or sometimes a second chance man. Some kind of old god or djinn, what have you.
She lowered her tone again.
According to the legend, you find his nest marked by an ancient flower.
Her voice got almost sing-songy at this point.
He will reincarnate you as the perfect version of yourself, giving you another shot at life.
Justin nodded approvingly.
Wow, not bad.
On the drive back to the rental, Justin brought up the legend and asked Ben if he was familiar with it. Ben smiled as he gently manipulated the steering wheel.
Moreau the Animator. I've been hearing that story since I was a kid. Once I tried to learn all the local flowers by heart to be sure I wouldn't miss the nest if I saw it. Ah. Well, I'm guessing you never found him.
Justin said with a laugh.
If you did, there's no way you'd still be this ugly.
Ben gave a wry smile, eyes remaining focused on the road ahead.
Good point.
As the last vestiges of the day's light disappeared in the sky, a cool breeze began to blow in from the surrounding hills. The breeze made the leaves and bushes rustle, enough to cover the movements of the figure now approaching the cabin. Heavy breathing accompanied the irregular movements, and the figure drew near enough to peer into the cabin windows, unseen by the inhabitants. A small group of friends could be observed laughing and chatting at the large dining room table.
Whoa, is this you?
Taylor walked in from the other room, holding a small framed photograph up for Ben to see. Pictured were 2 plain-looking teenage boys, smiling into the camera. Ben set his beer down and leaned in to get a good look.
Yeah, that's my cousin Joseph and I. We were probably 15, 16 years old, something like that.
Well, I gotta say, this is what they mean when they use the expression glow up.
Taylor giggled as she set the frame back on the end table.
So, where's Joseph these days?
Ben paused.
You know, it's a pretty sad story. He and I were in a bad car accident not long after that picture was taken. He didn't make it.
The conversation was suddenly interrupted by a thump outside the cabin wall.
Just the wind.
Nate encouraged.
It's been doing that all day.
The group turned slowly back to their drinks.
So, where is your cousin's son now?
Lily started the conversation back up.
I beg your pardon?
Shelby said Joseph used to live here with his son.
Ben returned with a confused look, but quickly recovered.
Right, that's right. Joe had a kid real early. That's a sad story, too.
He seemed somber now.
The boy drowned when he was 6.
Long after the conversation had died and the friends had turned in, someone stirred in the house. Nate wandered into the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water. He yawned as he waited for the glass to fill. Suddenly, a noise caught his attention. A soft, curious sound could be heard coming from under the front door. Nate slowly approached the door and cracked it open to get a look. There, sitting patiently on the front step, was a large white cat.
Hey, buddy. Where did you come from?
Nate stooped and patted the cat. The animal quickly slithered past him into the open doorway.
Hey, you can't.
Nate turned around just in time to see the cat running into the other room. He followed, but by the time he got there, the cat had disappeared. Feeling the weight of his eyelids and having no interest in hunting for the feline through the dark, Nate shrugged and headed back to his bedroom. Silence fell again upon the house.
So, what's going on with that girl at school?
Joseph asked through a smile, gently steering his father's old Chevy truck on the winding mountain road.
Nothing.
Ben laughed and looked out the window.
She thinks we should date, but I haven't decided whether I like her or not.
Joseph gave a short laugh.
Don't lie. It's the other way around. As sure as you're born.
Asshole.
Ben's smile dissolved. There was a brief silence. The hot summer air blew through the open windows and made the quiet feel natural. Suddenly, as they rounded a sharp corner, a logging truck appeared. It was moving the opposite direction and taking up both lanes, speeding perilously. Joseph shouted and swerved. The logging truck clipped the rear of the vehicle and sent it spinning off the road. It rolled repeatedly, smashing into a tree at the bottom of the hill. Ben's head collided with the corner post of the truck, and everything went black. When Ben regained consciousness, he was lying on the hood of the car, his body halfway through the windshield. Pain flashed through his limbs. Breathing was a struggle. Slowly, with great effort, he twisted his head to look around. He saw Joseph's body on the ground, crushed under the car's wheel. The sound of a siren filled the air, and the boy slipped back into unconsciousness. When Ben finally awoke, he was lying on an uncomfortable bed in a small, sterile room. Tubes and wires spread out from his heavily bandaged body. Looking up, the boy observed Shelby's face nearby, crinkled with concern.
You're awake. Thank God.
Ben felt his face and discovered that it too was swaddled in cotton.
Joe?
Shelby shook his head sadly and said nothing. Aunt Kath was sitting next to Shelby, and she laid a comforting hand on Ben's leg.
The EMTs said no one should have survived that crash. But you did, young man. You did.
A blood-curdling scream broke open the still night air. Ben jerked awake, clutching his blanket. He could hear the hurried sounds of people emerging from their bedrooms. Scrambling out into the hallway, he met Nate, Justin, and Lily.
Where's Taylor?
The group rushed down the hall to her bedroom and were immediately met with a bizarre scene. Taylor stood on her bed, a look of horror on her face. She pointed a shaking finger at the corner of her bedroom. There, writhing and twitching on the carpeted floor, was a white cat. The animal's eyes bulged from its head as it gurgled and drooled. It was convulsing like a creature possessed. It suddenly jumped to its feet and ran headlong into the wall, collapsing on impact. Regaining its footing, it ran into another wall. Repeatedly, the animal collided with the walls of the little room. Finally, the cat collapsed to the floor, rolling and contorting its body into unnatural shapes as it did so. The friends watched in horror as the cat screamed, the sound building to a crescendo and then abruptly ending. The animal was still on the floor.
What the fuck?
Justin knelt and inspected the now lifeless body.
What was that? And how the hell did that thing even get in here?
Nate cast a furtive eye around.
I'm sorry, guys. It ran in when I had the door open. I couldn't find it. But it didn't seem like a big deal. I didn't expect it to do whatever the fuck that was.
Taylor was heaving and fell back down onto the bed.
That was the scariest thing that has ever happened. You owe me, Nate.
Nate opened his palms defensively.
Look, I'm sorry. I'll make it up to you, okay?
Taylor groaned and motioned the group out with her hand. Everyone began to quietly file out of the bedroom. Ben gingerly picked up the animal by the tail and followed suit. Once outside the bedroom, Lily closed the door and grimaced at the dead feline in Ben's hand.
Ugh, what are you gonna do with it?
Ben shook his head with disgust.
I'm just gonna pitch it as far into the woods as I can.
As Ben stepped outside, Lily began heating up the kettle for chamomile tea. She sat at the table and waited for Ben, sipping her beverage. 10 minutes elapsed, then 20. Lily was just beginning to feel concern when the door opened, and Ben slowly entered.
That took a while. Did you find the poor thing a nice little resting place?
Ben's face was blank. He stared at Lily for a moment in silence. Then abruptly, he turned, disappearing down the hall to his bedroom. The next morning, Nate was up early making breakfast. Pots and pans clanged in the kitchen as he worked, and the house began to fill with the aromatic scent of a classic country breakfast. Taylor was next up, and she wandered out into the kitchen in search of coffee.
Don't bother,
Nate said, shooing Taylor out to the kitchen table.
I've got it covered.
Within minutes, Nate had provided a full mug of steaming coffee, a plate of bacon and eggs, and a bowl of fruit-garnished oatmeal.
Whoa, I almost forgot you were a chef.
Taylor laughed and began to dig in with gusto. Nate smiled and watched her as she attacked the meal. Then turning, he resumed his work at the stove. The loud clank of a fork falling on glass made him turn back around. Taylor was holding her throat with an expression of pain. She coughed and then moaned. When she spoke, it was raspy and halting.
My throat, my stomach, they feel like they're on fire.
Nate's mouth opened in horror.
Is there... Taylor, is there anything you're allergic to? Do you have an EpiPen?
Taylor shook her head and began to cry. Then she vomited on her plate. She looked up with blood dangling from her lips. Nate screamed for help, bringing the rest of the group out of their bedrooms. Emergency services were called. As they waited anxiously, Taylor began to grow sluggish, moaning and holding her stomach. She vomited twice more. When the ambulance finally arrived, half an hour later, Taylor was nearly comatose. Hours later, with the ambulance long gone, the remaining group sat silently in the living room. Shock had set in, and no one knew what to say. There was a sudden knock at the door. Justin ran to open it. Standing on the front porch was an officer from the Morgan County Sheriff's Office, Another one was crossing the gravel lot over from a parked county vehicle.
Hello, sir. I'm Officer Kelly. My partner here is Officer Daniels. You probably know why we're here.
Justin nodded and motioned them in. Once inside, Kelly clasped his hands together.
Your friend is in a bad place. That's just how it is.
The group shot each other worried glances. Ben spoke up.
How is she doing? What's wrong with her?
Kelly eyed the group closely.
Well, she's not doing well. Going in for surgery as we speak, but the outlook is, well, disfavorable. It looks like she might have been poisoned.
Gasps were heard around the room. Kelly motioned to the nearby doorway and began to walk.
This way to the kitchen?
In the kitchen, the officer picked up the oatmeal pot and smelled, then inspected the coffee maker.
Who made breakfast?
Nate raised his hand slowly, and Kelly exchanged glances with his partner.
And did you happen to put anything unusual in the meal?
Nate stammered in exasperation.
Look, I had nothing to do with this thing. I just made breakfast. I just wanted to make something nice for Taylor.
His head dropped, and he covered his face with his hand. Kelly leaned casually against the kitchen countertop.
Is Miss Taylor your girlfriend?
Nate shook his head.
No, I just felt bad about last night.
Last night?
Nate put a stray cat in Taylor's room. It wasn't a big deal.
Ben walked up behind Nate and put a comforting hand on his friend's shoulder, who turned with a confused expression. Officer Kelly, too, looked perplexed.
Okay, all right. We can talk about that more another time. Nate, was it? Do you have a room here? Where do you keep your stuff?
Nate showed the officers to his room. Once inside, Officer Daniels began poking around the pile of duffel bags and used clothing in the corner of the room.
Kelly, here's something.
Daniels held up one of the bags and opened it wide for the other man to see. Neatly arranged inside were several boxes of what looked to be rat poison. The bag was otherwise empty. Nate's eyes opened in surprise.
What? Oh, that is not mine.
His voice grew shrill.
That is not my shit!
Officer Daniels came up from behind and placed a hand on Nate's shoulder.
This doesn't mean anything necessarily. That being said, if it's okay with you, I think you should come back to our office and chat with us some more.
Nate slumped with defeat. He nodded silently, his eyes growing slick with moisture. The group looked on with shock as Nate silently allowed himself to be steered out to the patrol car. Once he was out, Kelly spoke with the group at length. After going through a long list of questions, he finally stood up and announced his intention to leave.
All you need to stay here until we get this figured out. I'll be in touch. Your friends are going to be fine. Don't worry.
This has been The Second Chance Man. Join us next time for episode 2, The Conclusion.